Well, good evening and welcome back to Wednesday Night Live this February 18th, 2015. Glad you could join us. I hope you enjoy the evening. If you're wondering, those of you who watch my program regularly know that this is Ash Wednesday, and I went forth for the ashes this evening. Let me just, for those of you who may not know, now this, the Ash Wednesday with the imposition of the ashes on the forehead is not universally done throughout the Orthodox Christian Church. Mostly, I believe Roman Catholics still do it. I think the Greek Orthodox, certainly the Orthodox Lutherans, I'm not sure about the others, but here's a very brief synopsis of why we have Ash Wednesday. Ashes have traditionally been used in the church as a symbol of repentance. Our Lord has told us that what he desires more than sacrifice is a broken and contrite heart. During this season of Lent, we reflect on God's great love for us in his Son, Jesus the Christ, who walked willingly to the cross, a cross which bears forgiveness and life for all who receive it. We too will follow Christ to the cross in these weeks leading to his ultimate victory over death at Easter. We begin with ashes, a mark of our brokenness. We end with the glory of the risen Christ, the mark of his victory and ours. So this is not a requirement of our church. Although I must say at the service tonight, most people did receive the ashes, but as it says here, it's a symbol of a broken and contrite heart. And with that, we'll move on. As I do every week at this time, I want to remind you about Compassion and Hope. Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center is a Christ-centered nonprofit ministry offering life-affirming alternatives to abortion and compassionate care to those who face pregnancy and abortion-related issues. As I've told you many times, Compassion and Hope is a very small organization. They are a pro-life organization. They are absolutely antithetical to anything of the Planned Parenthood, who are, but it would seem to me, to be pro-death. So, but they are very small. They have one small staff, one paid person, several volunteers, and they are there to help mothers who may be about to become mothers, may be having problems as new mothers, but they need your help. Compassion and Hope, 478-HOPE, 478-HOPE. Won't you please call them, see if there's something you can do financially or otherwise to help them with this mission for God's creatures, the newborn and unborn babies. God will bless you for it. Your heart will feel good, and they could sure use your help. Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center right here in Pocatello, 208-478-HOPE. Please call them. Well, there are just so many things happening in the news today. It's almost impossible to keep up with them. We missed last week because we had I don't really know what it was. I guess it's what we used to call the Pocatello crud. There's something going around, and I have a touch of it. I still have a touch of it. May just be allergies. I don't know. Last week I just really wasn't able to come in, and there's so much that has been happening that even missing a week, it's just snowballing. But you couldn't possibly have watched television for a moment unless you were watching ABC, CBS, or NBC, and maybe, I don't know if CNN and MSNBC even covered it. The National Prayer Breakfast, where Barry Soetoro, also known as Barack Hussein Obama, gave the, I guess, the keynote speech at the National Prayer Breakfast. Interesting and strange indeed. Josh, do we have that tooled up and ready to go? Okay, please watch this.
Driving us to do right. But we also see faith being twisted and distorted, used as a wedge, or worse, sometimes used as a weapon. From a school in Pakistan to the streets of Paris, we have seen violence and terror perpetrated by those who profess to stand up for faith, their faith. Profess to stand up for Islam, but in fact are betraying it. We see ISIL, a brutal, vicious death cult that, in the name of religion, carries out unspeakable acts of barbarism, terrorizing religious minorities, like the Yazidis, subjecting women to rape as a weapon of war, and claiming the mantle of religious authority for such actions. We see sectarian war in Syria, the murder of Muslims and Christians in Nigeria, religious war in the Central African Republic, a rising tide of anti-Semitism and hate crimes in Europe, so often perpetrated in the name of religion. And so how do we, as people of faith, reconcile these realities? The profound good, the strength, the tenacity, the compassion and love that can flow from all of our faiths, operating alongside those who seek to hijack religious for their own murderous ends. Humanity's been grappling with these questions throughout human history. And lest we get on our high horse and think this is unique to some other place, remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ. In our home country, slavery and Jim Crow all too often was justified in the name of Christ. Michelle and I returned from India, an incredible, beautiful country, full of this magnificent diversity, but a place where in past years religious faiths of all types have, on occasion, been targeted by other peoples of faith simply due to their heritage and their beliefs. Acts of intolerance that would have shocked Gandhiji, the person who helped to liberate that nation. So this is not unique to one group or one religion. There is a tendency in us, a sinful tendency that can pervert and distort our faith. In today's world, when hate groups have their own Twitter accounts and bigotry can fester in hidden places in cyberspace, it can be even harder to counteract such intolerance. But God compels us to try. And in this mission, I believe there are a few principles that can guide us, particularly those of us who profess to believe. And first, we should start with some basic humility. I believe that the starting point of faith is some doubt. Not being so full of yourself and so confident that you are right and that God speaks only to us and doesn't speak to others. That God only cares about us and doesn't care about others. That somehow we alone are in possession of the truth. Our job is not to ask that God respond to our notion of truth. Our job is to be true to Him, His word and His commandments. And we should assume humbly that we're confused and don't always know what we're doing, and we're staggering and stumbling towards Him. And have some humility in that process.
I don't even know where to begin, but I'm going to begin with the outrageous assertions about, bringing back about the Crusades. First of all, the Crusades happened 1,000 years ago. The Inquisitions were 500 or 600 years ago. Christians have stopped the Inquisitions. It was stopped by Christians. And even though those who called themselves Christians were perpetrating them, it's a very interesting study. The Inquisition itself is a very interesting study. Most people are unaware because what we usually, unless we have some determination to learn the truth, which you will never get from Mr. Obama or Sotero, we don't dig into the veritudes, if you will, of the truth. But it's an interesting thing when you study the Inquisition. Number one, that you never hear this, and you'd have to look it up. You don't take my word for it. As I say, always check me out. Most, if not many, if not most of those people who suffered the Inquisitions were people who were already condemned for another crime that was a death penalty. Now, during that period of time, the death penalty could be for much different from today. Very few things that will get you the death penalty today. During the time in which the Inquisitions took place, death penalty could be imposed for a lot of things. Many, if not most of those who were inquisitioned were people who were already suffering the death penalty for some other crime. And the Inquisition oftentimes gave them an opportunity to recant or to repent and actually to be absolved of their crimes or their sins and not have to pay the death penalty. They didn't always get out of prison, although many did. The number of people who died as a result of the Inquisition was incredibly low. Now, you wouldn't know that listening to Barry Soetoro and the apologist for the left and the liberal progressive intelligentsia who like to pound anything that is truly Christian or anything that is truly good and make it look bad. The Inquisitions, they were not good. Don't misunderstand me. And those who were perpetrating them, many of them, maybe not all of them, many of them actually thought they were doing God's work. A twisted philosophy or a twisted take on God's work, but many of them truly thought they were doing God's work. The Inquisition stopped. The Crusades, and we've had this pounded into our heads. I'm in my 70s. I can't remember when I didn't hear how the Crusaders were the bad guys. They invaded Arabia. They went into, and this is the party line, they went into Arabia to pay off their debts and to make themselves wealthy. And in some cases there was some truth to that. There were some noblemen who went because they had been told they were going to be able to garner vast wealth and riches, and they went perhaps for that sole purpose. But most of them did not. In fact, many of the noblemen, and most of them to begin with were of the noble, the knights, went at their own expense, and not a few of them actually went into penury and bankruptcy in order to do what they felt was important. What was it? Keep in mind that when Muhammad, the self-proclaimed prophet of Allah, and do never confuse Allah and God. In fact, if you're in Malaysia or in Indonesia, you can get in a lot of trouble as a Westerner for confusing those two terms. You do not use God interactive with Allah. They are very aware that they are not the same person. Pardon me. Pocatello crud. But I digress. So the Crusaders, so-called, and remember this, there was no United States of America during the Crusades. So when the Muslims refer to us as Crusaders, they're casting an aspersion, actually, because they hated the Crusaders. Why did the Crusaders go into Arabia? They went into Arabia because the Christian pilgrims who were trying to visit who were trying to go on pilgrimage, holy pilgrimage, and visit the Holy Lands, were being interrupted and enslaved at times and killed by the Muslims. They were being denied the opportunity to worship. And after 400 years, maybe 500 years, Pope Urban II finally said, enough. Now, he didn't just dream this up on his own. There were many who complained to him, noblemen and other people of political clout and all that, but people complained to him. And Pope Urban II said, this has got to stop. And he called upon the Christian faithful to relieve their brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. Remember, Christianity started in the Arabic lands. Christianity was there 700 or 600 years before Muhammad came on the scene and declared himself to be the prophet of Allah. Up until that time, Christians and Jews were the dominant religions of the area. There was a lot of paganism, but so the Crusaders basically were asked by the Pope and Christians to get back the Holy Lands that they had. Now, up until Muhammad came along and consolidated the tribes, paganism was rampant within the Arabians, the Arabic tribes. And to his credit, the one thing he did, credit in a strange way, was he consolidated these pagan tribes under a monotheistic point of view. He had an interesting way of doing this, but nonetheless he did. I would urge you, and I've urged you before, I would urge you once again, to get hold of this book called God's Battalions. Why this book? Because it's an easy read, and it gives you the history of the Crusades and really what it meant. It's God's Battalions, The Case for the Crusaders by Rodney Stark. And it's the truth about the Christian Crusades and Muslim jihad. It puts the lie to all the things you hear regularly in the news and from the sycophants of the Muslimists or Islamists, however you want to say it, who are always beating up on the Christians and Jews, and especially the Christians today. The Christians, as you learned a couple of weeks ago in one of our presentations, are the most persecuted religion on the face of this earth right now. The Jews are getting it pretty bad around the world also, very bad. Well, why does this come up? Well, because of the Barry Soetoro has a national and an international forum. When he speaks, people listen. They don't always hear the truth. They rarely hear the truth. But you notice how carefully when he speaks about our faith, he never tells you who and what he is. It has been declared by others, not by him, that he is a Christian. I don't believe it. I believe he is a Muslim. We know that his formative years were spent in the madrasas in Indonesia, and those are formative years that don't leave a young fellow. Regardless of all of the things that he did as he was growing up, you've seen the picture of him in his gangster hat smoking dope and various things that certainly were foundation stones for a good president of the United States. Well, this came up in part, the whole thing with the prayer breakfast, because there was a very interesting, and the prayer breakfast was before this, but there was a very interesting article in this last Sunday, February 15th, Idaho State Journal by Dr. Daniel Hummel, a professor at the university. And as you recall, a week ago, a little over a week ago, they're said to have been students, I'm not sure of the accuracy of that, but we'll say 3 Muslim students in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, were brutally murdered. They were murdered execution style by a monster that there's nothing redeeming that you can say about this man. But that triggered Dr. Hummel, who is the local point man for the Muslims in this area, to pen the following article. And if you read it, bear with me. Many of you I know don't subscribe to the ISJ, so you probably didn't read this. This was this last Sunday. The silence is deafening. Where is the outrage? Where is the media coverage? Where is we are nothing. On Tuesday night, February 10th, Mr. Craig Stephen Hicks in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, murdered Dia Shadi Barakat, Yusor Muhammad Abu Salah, and Razan Muhammad Abu Salah in cold blood. The police are saying it was a dispute over parking, but the Facebook page of Mr. Hicks indicates that it was anti-Muslim. It's a clear hate crime, and I wonder about that term. You know, that hate became a crime a few years back, and it's an interesting study in itself. But he says it's a clear hate crime. Really? Well, let's see how he proves that. But given the fact that this is a politically charged term, much like calling someone a terrorist, law enforcement are avoiding the term. If this had been a Muslim and the victim's non-Muslim, it would have been labeled a terrorist attack immediately, really. It would be another example of Islam driving Muslims to commit acts of violence. Nope. Mr. Hicks, a self-proclaimed atheist, did it, and Muslims were the victims. Now that's an interesting point because he just kind of contradicted himself. So let's try to understand Mr. Hicks, not his beliefs. Was he crazy? Did he have a bad childhood? The hypocrisy smells almost as bad as when France arrested comedian Dieudonné for Facebook posts that seemed to mock the We Are Charlie campaign. Freedom of speech for who? I think that's supposed to be whom. We shouldn't get on our high horse either, echoing the president. We arrested Cameron D'Ambrosio, an 18-year-old high school student, for rap lyrics, saying he was making terrorist threats. I don't remember who's we. I don't know anything about this thing. Many Muslims in the United States and around the world see this hypocrisy as clear as day. Freedom of speech when insulting Islam and Muslims, and charges of terrorism when the perpetrator is Muslim. A man kills 3 Muslim college students, and let's not be too hasty coming to conclusions, or let's just sweep it under the rug. Almost like a slap in the face, a Facebook page has been established defending Mr. Hicks and demanding his freedom. Do Muslim lives matter? Isn't this cute now? He's gotten on the bandwagon with the Ferguson crew. Black lives matter. Muslim lives matter. Let's all get on the bandwagon. The Twitter hashtag Muslim Lives Matter became a trending topic nationally. Despite the rhetoric, Islamophobia and the resulting hate crimes that spawn from this continual demonizations of Muslims in the United States and elsewhere are increasing. According to the FBI statistics on hate crimes against Muslims have increased between 2008 and 2012, the most recent year of data. And I would ask you again, what is a hate crime? If somebody does something criminal against you, does that automatically mean they hate you? Is the act itself hateful? Another one of those left-wing liberal buzzwords that they can attach significance to punish anybody that doesn't go with their agenda. In 2008, the FBI reported 130 Muslim victims of hate crimes in the United States. But in 2012, that number rose to 155 victims. We still don't know what kind of crimes. Of religious groups, it is still small in comparison to the number of hate crimes committed against people of the Jewish faith, who have the most reported hate crimes every year in the United States. Very refreshing, your candor there, Doctor. When compared to the total population of Jews in the United States in 2012, which, according to the Jewish Virtual Library, is 5,425,000, the proportion of hate crimes victims to total population is 2 10,000ths. When it might be 2 100,000ths, I'm not that good at math. When compared to the total population of Muslims in the United States, which is estimated to be about 2,600,000, according to Dr. Ishan Bagby in his 2011 mosque report, the proportion of hate crime victims to total population is 1 100,000th. This is still significantly less than hate crimes for the Muslim population in the United States. However, the trend is positive for the Muslim population. I don't really know what that means. It is also very likely that the statistics for Muslims are underreported because of the aversions Muslims have to report crimes to the FBI, given the loss of trust the Muslim community has invested in the FBI. High-profile crimes like the imam in North Miami Beach, Fuad Fahari, who the FBI tried to deport when he refused to be an informant, have hurt relations between the FBI and the Muslim community in the United States. The continual trend of increasing hate crimes against Muslims, along with the media silence and lack of general outrage surrounding the murder of these 3 Muslim students in Chapel Hill, are concerning. It's concerning because it means that only violence committed by Muslims is truly deserving of the media spotlight, and only these acts deserve condemnation. Last year, thousands of Muslims were either killed or fled from the Central African Republic by ravaging mobs of Christians. I don't remember reading that anywhere. And thousands of Muslims have been either killed or forced into camps in Burma by ravaging mobs of Buddhists. Yet the discussion continues to focus on ISIS, Boko Haram, and other Islamist groups. Yeah, we don't want to focus on those. Most Muslims agree that a healthy discussion needs to be on these groups and how and what they are doing is wrong. But the complete ignorance on violence committed against Muslims by non-Muslims strikes a chord with Muslims that reverberates the world over. Now, Dr. Daniel Hummel is an assistant professor of public administration in the Department of Political Science at Idaho State University. He teaches courses on finance, budgeting, community planning, and other topics. This semester, he is offering for the first time a course on Islam and public administration in the Islamic world. He is also active with the Muslim community in the city of Pocatello. A couple of comments showed up on the blogosphere following this article. As you may know, the Idaho State Journal posts these articles on the web, or however you say it, and so people are able to make their comments. And I won't name the people who made it, but this was an interesting response to Dr. Hummel. Professor Hummel's indignation is not totally without justification, but allow me to point out an egregious weakness in his reasoning. The sicko who perpetrated this outrage is a self-professed atheist. That widens the scope of his hatred far beyond Muslims. By definition, his hate crime cannot be narrowed to being anti-Muslim. His hatred has to be defined as anti-behavior. As such, he basically hates damn near everybody, or at least the very high percentage of all the people on earth who profess belief in a supreme being by any name. That his first victims were Muslim must only be coincidence. Another blogger says, I wholeheartedly agree with your comments. I did some research and found that where religion comes into discussion, Craig Hicks is an equal opportunity hater. He hates Christians, Jews, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Wiccans, and probably Unitarian Universalists. So saying this is a hate crime is likely neither true nor untrue. He hates all religions. The execution-style murder of 3 innocent college students is horrific. I believe our nation grieves with the families of the murdered students. The crime of first-degree murder carries the death penalty. I believe that this case rises to that level. And another writer, nothing going on in this twisted world can be justified. The horrific acts are unbelievable. Indeed, where is the outrage from all sides? I believe with the other 2 writers, we have some very sick people parading around as humans when they aren't. So that was Dr. Hummel's column. So I wrote in response to it. I won't even attempt to publish it with the ISJ, but I had some observations on Dr. Hummel's page, so I'd like to share them with you. Dr. Hummel, the apparent frontman for the local Muslim community, asked, where is the outrage? Where is the media coverage? Where is the nothing? This rhetorical question is posed as a perceived neglect by the non-Muslim community to be outraged by the murder of 3 Muslims in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Mind you, the fact that the murder story has been everywhere on national news television, in every important newspaper in the nation, and has gone viral on the internet seems to have eluded Dr. Hummel. It might be interesting to point out that this crime occurred 2,500 miles from Pocatello, and it probably wouldn't hurt to note that Muslim murders of 21 Christians, 45 police officers and security personnel, civilians in Denmark, and countless other recent atrocities by Muslims may, just may, mind you, have drowned out some of the cries from the Ummah, the Muslim community, regarding 3 Muslim students. They were executed by a monster who it is reliably reported is an atheist, Obama supporter, ACLU supporter, and Southern Law and Justice Poverty Center organizations, among many left-wing radical groups. He is not a Christian, and he is not a right-wing extremist. He is a murderer. And he murdered these people because he's evil, not because they were Muslim. But what's the real purpose of Dr. Hummel's article? I suggest it is to preemptively place anyone, perhaps me, who dares to speak against Islam and its horrors on the defensive. I suggest he is taking a page right out of Saul Alinsky's playbook to counter any opposition to the Muslim agenda, in this case building a facade of respectability for Islam in a community that is overwhelmingly Christian. Not that there have been any local incidents against Muslims, certainly nothing violent. There have not. Now you might, if you want to nitpick the fly poop out of the pepper, there was 1 or 2 Muslim women who made a complaint against a man who, for whatever reason, offended them at Walmart. That doesn't rise to the level of murder. And it could have happened. I don't know. That's about the only incident you or I have heard of anywhere in Bannock County, let alone in Pocatello. So in other words, Muslims are not being abused or beat up here in Pocatello. Dr. Hummel states it's a clear hate crime meaning the murders. Really? According to whom? The investigating police department doesn't think so. The murderer's neighbors feared him, but they don't think that they don't see this as a hate crime. In fact, from all available sources, it appears that if Craig Stephen hated anybody, it appears he hated everybody, equally, without regard to race, color, creed, gender, religion, or national origin. It appears that he was just a downright nasty guy, period. Murder of anyone is deplorable, and calling it a so-called hate crime doesn't make it any more or less a crime, regardless of who's the victim. But Dr. Hummel's ill-timed outcry is perhaps a bit hypocritical. Are we supposed to give these murder victims special recognition because they are Muslim? Did he cry out when the foreign tourist was murdered by a Muslim at a stoplight in a Midwestern city last year? How about the 19-year-old college student in Orange, New Jersey, murdered for revenge for Muslim deaths overseas? Or the Muslim that entered the Navy shipyard and murdered several people? Perhaps the Muslim Sharia advocate in Moore, Oklahoma, that beheaded a bookkeeper in the company where he formerly worked after calling for Islamic terror. Perhaps the Muslim that executed 2 homosexual men in Seattle, Washington. Maybe the 30-year-old man in Skyway, Washington, murdered by a Muslim fanatic. No? Well, how about the Muslim father that shot his lesbian daughter and her sex partner to death while leaving a copy of the Quran open to a page condemning homosexuality? By the way, these murders are only a few of those committed in 2014 in the United States by Muslims. And coincidentally, most, if not all, of the Muslim murderers were black, and most of the victims were white. Strange, but I don't recall any of the news reports shouting racist in banner headlines. And these are only a few of the murders committed in America by Muslims. Muslims murdering people around the world, including other Muslims, is so commonplace that we lose count of how many die in the name of Allah and or Muhammad. All in all, there have been few, if any, attacks upon Muslims in America by anybody screaming that he is avenging the name of Christ or Moses. When was the last time you saw a perp walk of a Christian that had been arrested for beheading a Muslim to give glory to God? No, I don't recall that either. Nor have I seen any burnings, amputations, disembowelings, or other atrocities for which Islam is infamous being committed by Christians or Jews anywhere, let alone in the U.S. There's enough outrage in the world to keep everyone unhappy. We don't need local Muslim apologists to invent new reasons to be outraged. Perhaps Dr. Hummel could give more attention to his role as an educator at ISU being paid for with our tax dollars. Leave the hand-wringing and finger-pointing and pot-stirring to clerics or others. I'm certain there are sufficient apologists available locally to cast aspersions upon those who fail to be properly outraged. And that's my response to Dr. Hummel's article in the Idaho State Journal. Here's interesting, the banner graphic they give it. There's a photograph of some people mourning. The women are wearing the hijab. And this is in Wendell, North Carolina. This picture comes from there. Where is the outrage? Well, okay. Interestingly enough, just the week, was it the week before that? Saturday, February 14th, mourning Muslims, vigil for murdered Carolina trio stands for peace. Okay. Does this require outrage? I don't know. You be the judge of that. Does this require outrage? We should be outraged. Many of us are outraged that the President of the United States has failed to protect our nation and to lead the world, and refuses, and his sycophants that work for him refuse to even use the term Islam when they talk about the atrocities that we continue to see coming from the religion of peace that call themselves ISIS. And yes, I am aware that they are not all the Muslims in the world. Depending on who's counting, the Muslims of the world are somewhere between 1.2 and 1.6 billion. There's a big between. Interestingly enough, there was a Pew Research report that came out recently that in the article, in the research, they found that something like 23 to 28% of American Muslims find it perfectly acceptable to commit jihad, violent actions against America in the name of Islam. These are people living under the mantle of freedom in this very nation, protected by the Constitution, protected from their own Sharia by the Constitution. And yet a quarter of the people are willing to take up jihad against their own nation. A quarter of 1.6 billion is what? 300 plus million? In other words, the entire population of this nation? That's a pretty significant small number. The CNN had an article listening. This was September of 2014. So this is last year, 6 or 8 months ago, 6 months ago. And it says here, Ali Muhammad Brown was focused on one thing, authorities say. My mission is vengeance. For the lives of millions of lives are lost every day in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and all these places where innocent lives are being taken every single day. So a life for a life. That is what law enforcement say Brown told a police investigator in New Jersey when he was interviewed in last July. The U.S. government was doing evil within his own borders, too, Brown told law enforcement, according to court papers. Brown, a 29-year-old from Seattle, is the prime suspect in a killing spree stretching from New Jersey to Washington State. Between April and June, police say Brown killed 3 people in Washington State, allegedly shooting at them close range at night in quiet locations. Also in June, 19-year-old college student Brendan Tevlin was found inside an SUV in West Orange, New Jersey, dead of multiple gunshot wounds, authorities said. Police say they traced the gun used in all of the killings to Brown. Brown confessed, according to court documents, telling investigators he strictly follows the Muslim faith and had become angry with what he believed the U.S. was doing abroad. Sources tell CNN that Brown was born in the United States and has family in New Jersey. And it goes on. Brown, and you know, we can look at this, and the guy's obviously a nut job, although that won't be his defense. But he is doing this in the name of Allah, his totem. Well, about last April, almost a year ago, a man accused of fatally shooting 2 men in a parked car, cutting off their hands and heads and burying them in the woods in New Jersey has been indicted. 29-year-old Yusuf Ibrahim of Jersey City faces murder, kidnapping, robbery, and desecrating human remains charges in the 16-count indictment handed up Monday by a state grand jury. He remains jailed in Hudson County. Excuse me. State authorities have said Ibrahim shot and killed 25-year-old Hani Tawadros and 27-year-old Amgad Kones after he abducted them in February 2013 and buried them in a shallow grave in Atlantic City. These 2 victims, by the way, were Egyptians living in Jersey City. Another reason to get rid of people in the name of Allah. Now this is reaching back a little bit, but because these are sensational, they're worth talking about, and only in response to Dr. Hummel's false declaration of where's the outrage. I think, and exactly what does he mean by outraged? Are we supposed to get up in arms and do like the Muslims do when somebody says something they don't like about Muhammad or about Allah? Are we supposed to go nuts and burn a city and kill everybody in sight that disagrees with us? Is that what he means by outrage? Does he mean that we're supposed to all bow toward Mecca in repentance and seek Allah? What does Dr. Hummel mean by outrage? What he means to do is put up a false curtain to shield Islam from the fact that, and you can use the term hijacked if you want to. I think that's disingenuous because, as I've told you many times, ISIS has hijacked nothing. They're practicing the purest, most fundamental form of Islam. That doesn't make it right, and there are a whole lot of Muslims that disagree with it. I wonder if they're outraged. Where is their outrage? I wonder where Dr. Hummel's outrage is when he sees Christian babies being beheaded in Syria and in Iraq, Christian babies being disemboweled in the name of Allah. Today there was an interesting thing on Rush, and I had heard this before, first time I'd heard Rush speak of it. There are reports, at least one major report coming out of Iraq now, that ISIS and other Muslim groups, I presume, are actually harvesting body parts, organs, from the people they murder and selling them on the black market as part of their income. I suspect that it's true. I would rather believe it isn't, but we've seen when they took the Jordanian pilot and put him in a cage and burned him with gasoline and on a public display. We've seen it when they did the same with 45 policemen and security officers just the other day, just a couple days ago. We've seen when they took 21 Christians, only because they're Christians, took them down to a beach someplace and beheaded them in a public spectacle. And you may have seen this on television, where you see the 21 men in the orange jumpsuits with a murderer behind each one, clad in black, and they beheaded these 21 men for the only reason being that they are Christians. Even the Pope has spoken on it. Barry Soetoro, also known as Barack Hussein Obama, sometimes claiming to be President of the United States, only Obama, of all the leaders in the world, will not even mention the word Islam in conjunction with these horrible things. The Pope today basically said Islam has declared war on the world. The Cardinal in New York echoed the same thing. Even Franklin Graham, a very soft-spoken, kindly gentleman who is following in his father's footsteps of bringing peace and help to the world, Franklin Graham was very, very upfront about saying what Islam is doing and what it truly means. And yet, Barry Soetoro can't bring himself to mention it. And he's got this sycophant. I don't know if you've seen this woman. She's a real piece of work. Her name is Harf. Interesting last name. And I'm not knocking a person's name. It's just that the name is so unusual. And it seems, whenever I see the name Harf, H-A-R-F, her name is Marie Harf, and she is a spokesperson for the Department of State, blonde with these big horn-rimmed glasses, looks like some man-hater from the 60s, very lacking in personality. She, well, I had to set aside, she has been ridiculed now by many people, left and right, for statements she made, I think it was yesterday, when she declared that the only problem, and I'm doing this deliberately for the ironic humor of it, if there is any. The only problem with all these young men, these poor youths in the Middle East, the reason they're doing this is because they don't have jobs. If we could just help them get jobs, they'd stop doing these things. No mention of Islam, no mention of any of those things. Somebody on television the other night, it was funny. He said, "I'd like to be a fly on the wall in the room where they sit around, the Obamianists, where they sit around trying to figure out what words they can use to make sure that they don't offend the Islamicists, the Muslims who are committing the atrocities all over the world. How can they twist things into something unrecognizable as logic, just as long as it doesn't offend the Muslims?" Well, so Abdul Hakim Mujahid Muhammad of Memphis, Tennessee, says his trial in a fatal Little Rock Army facility attack is being handled in Arkansas State Court to get him the death penalty. His father alleges a government cover-up. Reporting from Little Rock, Arkansas and Memphis, Abdul Hakim Mujahid Muhammad insists he is an Islamic radical, has confessed to killing an Army soldier and wounding another at a Little Rock recruiting station 2 years ago, and wants to be tried on terrorism charges in federal court. You just don't see, even this one guy whose last name is Brown and the rest of his name is Islamic, you just don't see that many Christians and Jews doing these things. All right, let's. I've got another piece here, and it has to do with the apologetics. That there's a playbook, I guess, other than the Saul Alinsky playbook, which is universally subscribed to these days. But there must be a playbook that all of these apologists for Islam have, and it triggers these genetic things in them, I guess, that makes them come forth to, whenever they get a chance, to try to twist the thing and make it into something it isn't. Josh, do we have that other piece up there? Okay, this is Gabrielle, Brigitte Gabrielle, brilliant lady. She's been there, she knows the thing, and she was asked a question by a college student in a forum, and here's the way she answered it.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace to you all. My name is Saba Ahmed. I'm a law student at American University. I am here to ask you a simple question. I know that we portray Islam and all Muslims as bad, but there's 1.8 billion Muslim followers of Islam. We have 8 million plus Muslim Americans in this country, and I don't see them represented here. But my question is, how can we fight an ideological war with weapons? How can we ever end this war? The jihadist ideology that you talk about, it's an ideology. How can you ever win this thing if you don't address it ideologically?
Great question. I am so glad you're here, and I am so glad you brought that up because it gives us an opportunity to answer. What I find so amazing is since the beginning of this panel, which we are here about Benghazi attack against our people, not one person mentioned Muslims. We are here against Islam, or we're launching war against Muslims. We are here to discuss how 4 Americans died and what our government is doing. We were not here to bash Muslims. You were the one who brought up the issue about most Muslims, not us. And since you brought it up, allow me to elaborate with my answer. There are 1.2 billion Muslims in the world today. Of course, not all of them are radicals. The majority of them are peaceful people. The radicals are estimated to be between 15 to 25%, according to all intelligence services around the world. That leaves 75% of them peaceful people. But when you look at 15 to 25% of the world Muslim population, you're looking at 180 million to 300 million people dedicated to the destruction of Western civilization. That is as big as the United States. So why should we worry about the radicals, 15 to 25%? Because it is the radicals that kill. Because it is the radicals that behead and massacre. When you look throughout history, when you look at all the lessons of history, most Germans were peaceful. Yet the Nazis drove the agenda. And as a result, 60 million people died. Almost 14 million in concentration camps. 6 million were Jews. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at Russia, most Russians were peaceful as well. Yet the Russians were able to kill 20 million people. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at China, for example, most Chinese were peaceful as well. Yet the Chinese were able to kill 70 million people. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. When you look at Japan prior to World War II, most Japanese were peaceful as well. Yet Japan was able to butcher its way across Southeast Asia, killing 12 million people, mostly killed with bayonets and shovels. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. On September 11th in the United States, we had 2.3 million Arab Muslims living in the United States. It took 19 hijackers, 19 radicals to bring America down to its knees, destroy the World Trade Center, attack the Pentagon, and kill almost 3,000 Americans that day. The peaceful majority were irrelevant. So for all our powers of reasons and us talking about moderate and peaceful Muslims, I'm glad you're here. But where are the others speaking out? And since you are the only Muslim representative, save the applause till the end. Thank you. Thank you. And since you're the only Muslim representative in here, you took the limelight instead of speaking about why our government, and I assume, are you an American? you're an American citizen. So as an American citizen, you sat in this room, and instead of standing up and saying a question or asking something about our 4 Americans that died and what our government is doing to correct the problem, you stood there to make a point about peaceful, moderate Muslims. I wish you brought 10 with you to question about how we can hold our government responsible. It is time we take political correctness and throw it in the garbage where it belongs and stop calling it state.
I love that woman. She doesn't hold back. There was a question that came up about a week ago on television, and it was rhetorical, and yet it made me think a little bit about an answer to it. And that was, what can we do with these Americans, either naturalized or native born, who are Americans and going to the Middle East and joining ISIS and these other groups and fighting in combat and then coming back and posing an obvious threat excuse me, to the safety and security of all Americans? That's a very good question. We live in a free society, and the Islamicists are really using that against us. Our freedom is our weakness. That's our Achilles heel. Our Constitution that protects us is our weakness when it comes to dealing with the Muslims and Sharia. Well, here's Ralph Lillig's idea. It ain't pretty. Many of my detractors in this city are not going to like it. I'm sure that the Great for Hate people will jump on the bandwagon and start castigating me because I'm such an evil Islamophobe or whatever they're going to portray me as this week. But here are some ideas. Give these some thought. As I mentioned, this little thing right here, the Constitution of the United States, is our Achilles heel when it comes to dealing with Islam, because Islam is not just a religion. That's only a small part of it. It is an entire way of life, from cradle to grave. If you are Muslim and you are a faithful Muslim, and it can be difficult at sometimes because there are so many twists and turns. If you live under Sharia, you're accustomed to living much different from the way we live in this country. Sharia has very little latitude for questioning or observing. So people come to this country for protection, for safe haven, to make a living, and then something happens, and they get here, and they're the second generation, or maybe even the third generation, become radicalized, and they go to the country, and wherever ISIS is fighting, and they join up against potentially their own American brothers and sisters, as is happening right now at Al-Assad Air Base, where 300 Marines, that's about a company of Marines. That's not a lot. Granted, they're worth 3 times that in their ability to fight back, maybe 4 or 5 times that, but 300 completely surrounded by maniac ISIS. That is Custer's last stand. And unless Barry Soetoro gets off his skinny butt and does something, I fear the worst for my brothers in Al-Assad Air Base. But I digress. Here's what I would do if I were made king tomorrow, or by some strange quirk became president, and I could say this, because we now know that the president doesn't have to follow the Constitution. Barry Soetoro has shown us that he can keep his whole life a secret, he can give diktats, and people have to follow them, and that's just the way it is. But if I were the guy who called the shots, here's what I would do to deal with those people who come from our nation and go over to fight on behalf of ISIS. First of all, I would deny all no-go zones in this country. Now, it may sound strange to you. You may have a hard time believing it. There are some areas in our country where police and fire and all that do not go. Not as big and as bad as the banlieues in Paris, but if it's 1 square block, it's bad enough. This is the United States of America. And my badge used to say City of Los Angeles. If I had to go any place in the city, I went. That was my job. And yet there are no-go zones. Dearborn, Michigan is becoming infamous for some of them. All right, so first of all, do away with the no-goes. If you have to get 20 cops to go in and arrest somebody, do it. Get all 20 of them, all right? Deny re-entry of jihadists. Revoke their passport, revoke their citizenship. And I don't care if they're native, native-born or naturalized. Revoke their passport, revoke their citizenship. Deport all known terrorists to their country of origin. And our FBI has been keeping an eye on these guys. They know who a lot of them are. Deport all known terrorists to their country of origin. Now, don't wait until they take off. Deport the entire family, close and extended, of all jihadists to their country of origin. So, if Muhammad Jr. here decides that he wants to go fight on the behalf of his Islamic brothers, and he's a Native American, and he decides to do that, you deport him, you revoke his citizenship, and his family. Now, I realize that sounds pretty, the left-wingers and the progressive liberals are probably tearing their hair out screaming about it. It's meant to be very harsh. You punish the whole for the one. Kind of like when you were in boot camp. One guy screwed up and the whole company had to suffer for it until they got the picture. Deport the entire family, close and extended. Confiscate all real property of jihadists and their families, just like they do in a dope raid where these kingpins of dope down in Miami, they have these huge castles, and DEA comes in, they just confiscate the whole thing. The Marshal Service takes it over, and they sell it at auction. Revoke citizenship of the family of jihadists, close and extended. So, do you think it would be a powerful inducement? Let's say that you or I decided we wanted to do something evil against our own country, but we knew that if we got caught, not only were we going to go to the joint or get sent off to someplace, but our whole family would suffer for our actions. You think that might slow it down a little bit? I think it might. I think some of these honor killings, you know, these fathers that kill their daughters in the name of honor, there might be some repercussions to these kids that decide that they're 20 years old and they want to go to fight on the side of ISIS because their ancestors came from wherever they came from. All right? And there can be no refuge in the civilized world for Islamic fundamentalist terrorists. So you make the whole pay for the few. I think it would slow things down. We could do without a few more of those anyway. Those of you who do read the paper, you know, I've told you before, I like to take this red pen and go through the paper sometimes. When I get done, it looks like a butcher shop is just bleeding. Have you noticed what's going on in the paper recently? The obituaries are random now. They've got one page for obituaries, and then as you turn the pages, there's one there that just happens to be next to an ad that you looked at, and there's one on the back page, and the two over here. There's no rhyme or reason to it. They're just, oh, we got to fill the space. Oh, throw a dead body in there. Yeah, that's good. We'll use that. They don't know at the ISJ, they don't know the difference between CORP as in corporation and CORPS as in Corps, like Marine Corps. They don't know. Look in the paper, you'll see Marine Corps died or whatever. I saw the other day where a man who was a sergeant in the Army, spelled S-A-R-G-E-N-T. Does anybody spell check these things? Do they have any readers that check these things out anymore? And everybody dies, they died at their home. Not in their home, but at their home. That's enough of my rant for tonight. God bless you. Please join us again next Wednesday. We'll cover some more of the same familiar territory, get us new stuff. Have a good, safe week. God bless you and yours. Don't forget to watch Aaron Hayes this Sunday at 5 o'clock. Good night.